Hey there. If you have a scary story you'd like to hear on the channel, then go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. And of course, thank you. I am a 27-year-old guy, and I live in an apartment by myself. I'm also a bit of a workaholic, so I do spend a lot of time at my desk until something like 3 in the morning. Then I go to sleep and start the whole process over at 9. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I guess, I work from home, so I can pretty much spend every waking hour working. I know, I'm wasting my youth, but that's all besides the point. As I mentioned, I'm usually up until close to 3 or 4 in the morning, and I live alone. I do sometimes get a bit jumpy when I'm tired, but for the most part, I manage. The creepy thing that this story is about, though, happened somewhere close to a month ago. I was up late at night working on spreadsheets for the month so I could give them to upper management, when I thought I heard a knock on the door. At first, I was sure that I was just hearing things, but then I heard the knocking again. I looked at my clock and I was certain that I was losing it. It was 3-something in the morning. Who the hell was at my door? I got up and went over to answer it, and I looked out the peephole, and there was a woman standing there. She looked like she was dressed somewhat professionally. She was wearing a nice shirt and skirt, and from what I could see of her demeanor, she wasn't acting like she was on something or like she had something wrong with her. So I went ahead and opened the door and asked her how I could help her. She immediately goes into this spiel about how her name is Michelle Sanders and that she was an officer with the CIA. She tells me that she's on a special assignment and that she is looking for a man named Douglas something or other. She then asked me what my name was. I tell her, and then reiterate I am not the person that she's looking for. She looks at me for several moments and then asks to see my ID so that she could verify that I was, in fact, not Douglas. I have to admit that it was stupid of me, but I agreed and I stepped back into my apartment to grab my wallet and get my license. As soon as I stepped back, she pushed her way into the entryway. Now, I will say again that it was 3:30 in the morning, so my brain wasn't firing on all cylinders. So while this was weird, I also wasn't really sure what I should do. I grabbed my license and handed it to her, and as she was looking it over, I asked her what her name was again. She repeated that she was Michelle Sanders with the CIA. It was at that point that I realized that she hadn't shown me any identification, so I asked to see her badge. She looked at me, looking back at the license, and then handed it back saying, "That won't be necessary." She then walked into my living room and through the hallway, pushing each door open and glancing into each room one by one. Again, I just stood there a bit dumbfounded at the fact that this woman was walking through my apartment, glancing into each room and just ignoring me. After about 10 minutes of this, my brain finally started working, and it occurred to me that this wasn't normal. I pretty much said that I told her that it was weird to me that she had entered my home and hadn't shown me a warrant or anything, and that she should leave. She stared at me for a moment, nodded her head, and walked toward the door. She pushed it open, looked at me as she went to leave, and said, "Thank you for your time, sir. You won't hear from us again," and then just left. She just literally walked out the door and down the hall and outside. I have no idea what the hell any of this was, and I honestly do not know if she was legitimate or not, though I would guess she wasn't. She certainly looked and spoke the part, but nothing about it was sensible. I don't think that the CIA would send a single agent to someone's home like that, and I don't think they just peacefully enter and look through rooms. Plus, I wouldn't think they would frequently get the wrong address for someone they were looking for. I mean, they're the CIA, not the local PD. So that's my weird story. Some random professional-looking woman came to my apartment at 3 in the morning, claimed she was CIA, and then snooped through my apartment a bit before just leaving. It was seriously weird. Nothing ever came of it. No one ever followed through, never came back or anything like that. I would guess that she was looking for someone, sure, but I don't really think that she worked for any government agencies. I guess I'm just thankful that I wasn't the person she was looking for. I have a creepy story that took place on my 20th birthday back in 2017. Back then, I was a bit down on my luck. So on my birthday, my cousin Sasha called me and told me that she was going to take me out to eat a nice lunch for my birthday, and I wasn't going to turn that down. Sasha was my best friend growing up, so I loved spending time with her, and since she and I had grown apart, I was more than happy to go with her. She had offered to take me to a really nice Italian place, but I'm also the kind of person who doesn't want people to spend too much money on me, so I suggested a smaller Mexican food place that I had been to once or twice. We got there and they're not super busy. In fact, it was the middle of the day on a Tuesday, so the restaurant was pretty much empty with only a few tables being occupied. We got seated and we sat there for a while before someone came over and asked us if we had been served yet. The person looked like a manager based on how they were dressed, and we mentioned to him that no one had come over to take our order or anything. He apologized and he said that he would take our drink orders and that someone would be with us to take care of us right away. We told him what we wanted to drink and he walked away toward the back of the restaurant. After about 3 or so minutes, a second man walked out from the back with 2 glasses of tea and slammed them down on the table in front of us. He literally nearly slammed them down on the table to the point that mine spilled over and made a small mess on the table. I made a bit of a shocked sound and he just stared at me for a moment, then walked away back to the back of the restaurant. I sat there for a moment kind of like, what the hell is his problem? But shrugged it off and cleaned up the mess with my napkin. We just sat there drinking our tea for a few moments, talking about nothing in particular. We both got through our drinks and just kind of sat there confused for around 20 more minutes. At this point, I actually apologized to Sasha for recommending this place, as the service was obviously terrible today. She asked me if I had ever had any issues here before, and I told her no, that both times I'd been here, it was a great place. By the time we hit a half an hour since we had gotten our teas, I decided to wave down another person that worked there, and I asked them for the manager. They said they would get him and walk to the back. While we were waiting for him, Sasha said that if I wanted, we could still go to the Italian place, and I said that sounded like a good idea. When the manager got to our table, he asked if we were still having issues, and I mentioned that by this point, we had been sitting there for over 40 minutes, and I'd appreciate it if we could just get the check so we could go. The manager apologized to us several times. He said that there would be no charge for the drinks, and then asked if he could make it up to us with a gift card or something, because this was obviously not the type of service he wanted us to have. I said that was fine, and he went through getting me a gift card and told us to have a nice day, and immediately walked to the back. His face looked angry as hell, to be honest, like he walked to the back with a purpose. We turned to leave, and within a few moments of us getting out the front door, I heard the door to the restaurant slam open loudly, and someone was shouting. I turned to look at what was going on, and I saw the man that had dropped our drinks on the table walking towards us aggressively and flinging his arms as he screamed at us. To put it lightly, he was shouting, "You stupid bees got me fired," What the F is wrong with you, you stupid stuck-up bee? I was pretty pissed off already about this whole thing, so I just turned around and said that it was his fault that he had decided not to do his job. As soon as I said this, the man pulled a kitchen knife out from his apron and started sprinting at us. I told Sasha to run, and we made a mad dash to the car, jumped in, and shut and locked the doors immediately. After a few seconds, he got to the car and was slamming his hands on my window, screaming that he was going to kill us for ruining his life. I'm sitting there, watching this guy slam his fist against the glass and screaming, while holding a large knife in his other hand. After banging on the window and trying to pull the door open, he started reaching down toward the tire with the knife, and I told Sasha to gun it, his safety be damned. She did. She threw it in reverse and slammed on the pedal, knocking this guy to the ground, then drove out of the parking lot as quickly as she could. After getting a few blocks away, she pulled over and asked me what we should do. If we should call the cops, go back and talk to the manager, go make sure we didn't kill the guy or something. I told her to call the cops and tell them what happened, and I said I would call the restaurant to see if they needed us to come make a statement. She called 911. I called the restaurant and talked with the manager, and he said that he had already called the cops and that they were actually there now. He asked if we were okay, and I told him that, other than being scared out of our minds, we were fine. Sasha then looked over and told me that the police wanted us to come back so we could give a statement, so we turned around and headed back to the restaurant. When we pulled up, the guy was already in handcuffs, and the manager met us alongside the police. We talked to the police about what happened, and the manager had corroborated the whole thing, telling the officers that he had fired the waiter because of the service, and that he then ran out of the kitchen with a knife and said he was going to make us regret it. From what I can tell, he was just in a bad mood and snapped, though I don't know if that really does the situation justice. I've had bad days and didn't want to deal with people, but I've never grabbed a knife and decided to chase people saying I was going to kill them. Thankfully, nothing more happened, and he was hauled off by the cops. I never went back to the restaurant, and I actually still have that gift card in my wallet, though I don't think it'll ever get spent. This happened when I went to visit my sister Alexa and her husband in Texas. My family had always lived in Colorado, but any chance she got, Alexa could be found outside exploring and always on the move. So the first chance she got after high school, she started moving around to better see the country, I suppose. She ended up meeting her husband Edgar when she lived in Utah, and they moved back to Colorado briefly before finally settling in Texas due to his job. They didn't have kids and didn't plan to, so they still roamed around a lot when they could. She was 3 years older than me, and I always lived vicariously through her. I still lived in Colorado, and the thought of moving to another state was kind of nerve-wracking to me, but watching her was good enough for me, especially when she would invite me over to at least see the area and try to convince me to move too. So one year, my boyfriend at the time, JP, and I decided we would take a vacation down to Texas and stay with them for a few days. It was my 5th anniversary with the company I worked for, which gave me an extra week of vacation. I was itching to use it before the end of the year, like I usually did, and I wanted to actually go somewhere and do something. Alexa invited us to stay with them and offered to pick us up from the airport if we flew, which would save us a lot on a hotel and gas, so hell yeah, we took the offer. JP had actually been to parts of Texas a few times, so I was the only one that had never been, so I was excited and nervous about it all the same time. The flight was fine. There was mild turbulence, but I was fine otherwise. Airplanes made me nervous. Like I said, I'm kind of a wimp. I hadn't seen Alexa since Christmas, which was nearly 6 months ago, so it was no surprise when we flipped our lids in the airport. We got back to her place and she showed us to the spare bedroom, then walked us around the rest of the home. It was gorgeous. They had a huge fenced-in backyard with a garden full of produce, and she even made salads with the stuff she grew. And her dog Ray, which she had brought with her for Christmas, he was a cute little corgi with a lot of energy. We sat and chatted for a while, and I helped her prep dinner while we waited for Edgar to get off work. We flew out on a Friday, so we would be able to spend time with both of them over the weekend while he was off, and Alexa took the week off as well, so we weren't sitting around with nothing to do. We had a cookout and sat on their back patio, just having a good time, talking and reminiscing. We then got on the topic of camping, and they suggested we should do it over the weekend. We weren't expecting this, so of course, we didn't have any camping supplies like a tent or sleeping bag. However, they were set on this idea, and while they had an extra tent, we went and bought some other equipment so we were prepared. So after we got back from shopping, we stayed at their place that night since it was already late, and then started packing stuff for a camping excursion. We got the tents and sleeping stuff together, then we packed a couple of coolers with food and drinks, so that way we wouldn't run out while we were there. The reason they wanted to pack so much was because it wasn't going to be a quick trip back to the city if we forgot anything. We were going to be staying in very South Texas, like close to the border. She said that at night it gets really dark and quiet, and there's rarely anyone around to intrude, so it's a beautiful place to get away. However, it also tends to get cooler, so they warned us to be prepared for that. Otherwise, we got all packed up and took Edgar's truck out there. He had a bench seat in the back, so we could all four sit in there and have our stuff in the bed. It was perfect. So when we got there, she was absolutely right. There were trucks every once in a while where people were patrolling. We saw some guy on a bike with a huge tub-like thing on the back that he was putting trash in that he was picking up, which was pretty cool. But to my surprise, people really did leave us alone. We got the tent set up and then made a fire since it was going to get cold, and just kicked back again, talking and having a good time. The guys were constantly trying to one-up themselves, doing push-ups and backflips, so Alexa and I were cracking up, making fun of them. Everything was going great until we had a van pull up and 3 guys got out of it. I was a little nervous because I had asked my sister if we would be trespassing, and she said no, and that people do this all the time. I know it doesn't make it right, but I trusted her and didn't have any reason to think otherwise. The guys stopped and stood up, dusting themselves off and looking over at them. As 2 of them approached, I could tell as they got closer that they were in camo, but it was the digital stuff, so they were out in the desert looking area with no green to hide in as is, but it also wasn't the natural looking stuff. I was already a little bit nervous, but when Edgar went to welcome them, the guy immediately yelled at him to shut up and not move. He then asked us what we were doing out there, and my sister tried explaining we were just camping. That's when the first guy waved the second guy over, and we noticed he was holding a gun and started walking towards the guys. JP started saying something when the guy raised the gun to his face, telling him to shut up again. At this point, I am freaking out internally and look over at my sister to gauge her reaction, and the fact that she looked just as terrified did not bode well for me. The first guy told us we weren't allowed to be here, and they made the guys get on the ground and started restraining them with something other than handcuffs. Then the first guy made Alexa and I stand up and had us lean against Edgar's truck. He said we would all have to go with him to make a report and asked if we had anything illegal on us, and we said no. He then started patting us down, but it wasn't a normal pat down. He was very aggressive and seemed to linger when he was touching our hips and thighs. I then saw that he got close to my sister's face and whispered something. When he pulled back, she looked over towards me and I could see she was about to start crying. He then yelled over to the second man to have them stand up, saying he would be waiting here with him and that we would be going back with him for a strip search since we could be smugglers. The third guy that was standing by the van then came to us and started pulling us over to get in. This is when my sister started pleading with them. We weren't here to do anything other than camping and promised to leave if they let us go. And all I could do was nod in agreement as I choked back tears myself. But the guy wasn't having it and threatened to shoot us if we didn't shut up. As we were stalling to get in the van, the first guy was going through our coolers when we noticed some lights approaching in front of us. They seemed to slow down as they curved around the area we were in, and the third guy that was with us started waving at the car. I was beginning to worry that it was someone else with them and that we were screwed for sure. But then Edgar started yelling out for them. It made the guy that was with them start to look out frantically as he didn't know what to do and looked over at the first guy who was now standing and looking at the strange car and then back at Edgar. He then started swiftly walking over, but calmly, towards the van saying, "Let's go." And the second guy started running over to him. The guy with us said something to the effect of, "Watch what you tell people," and pushed us back. They all got in the van and drove off. The car that we saw had stopped, and the van slowed down as they passed the car, then sped off. Once they were out of view, we ran over to the guys since they still had their hands behind them, but they had them out by the time we got there. They had only tied them in a knot with what looked like shoestrings, so not very good or sturdy, thankfully. Then the person in the car got out and came over to us. It was an older man in a cowboy hat, and he asked us what was going on and if we were okay. We all frantically started explaining what happened, and the man ran back to his car where he said his phone was and called for help. After he got off the phone with them, he explained to us that he was a retired cop and he liked to drive out here as well and watch the sunset, and he had seen plenty of people doing the same thing as us. But he said something felt off when he saw the van and the man standing with JP and Edgar, so he stopped. And I could not thank that guy enough either. When the police showed up and we explained everything, they didn't seem shocked by any of this. I know they're probably trained to not show expression, but it was just a terrifying situation for us, and they seemed like it was just another day. But when Edgar started to become upset about the whole thing, they finally told us this wasn't the first time they've had this reported. They've been telling people to not do this for this exact reason, but of course, some people don't listen, and some, like my sister and Edgar, hadn't heard anything about it. So they took our report and suggested we leave in case they come back, and we didn't hesitate. We drove back almost in silence to their place, with Edgar trying to lighten up the mood, and we all went to bed. I tried asking Alexa what the guy said to her, but she refused to acknowledge the question or wouldn't tell me. I didn't push it beyond that because obviously it was terrifying. The next day was a bit awkward, but we quickly pushed forward so we could still have a good time. We ended up going to an arcade-style bar thing that weekend and then hung out at their place. The rest of the week was still fun as well, and by the end of it, we put it behind us. They tried apologizing when we left, but hell, it's not like they expected any of that to happen. Bad part is, they never found or caught the guys either. I just hope they were never successful in getting people in the van. It never fails to amaze me how brave some people are in public, especially towards other people such as myself. I started working at Walmart a few years out of high school, so barely 21. I definitely ran into some jerks before, but the creepy old guys were the kicker. What's worse is how they didn't seem to care who else was around to witness this. I started working in the fitting rooms, and we saw plenty of people attempt to do inappropriate things in them. Those are stories for another day. I eventually transferred to customer service because I was tired of being the one to call maintenance in the fitting rooms. Before Walmart had the specific money service center, we did it at customer service. So money orders, money transfers, and even some utility payments. We started getting this one guy that just looked slimy as hell. He always wore jeans and a nasty tank top. His hair was really long and stringy, like he washed twice a year, but usually pulled it back into a ponytail. He would hit on all of the younger girls and treat the older ones like dirt if he couldn't just avoid them. He started coming up to customer service to be rang up when the lines were long because he learned we won't turn people down. When it was just me there, he'd always be leaning over the counter, smirking, and he'd always called me babe, which alone was creepy and made me feel gross. Unfortunately, he had more reason to go to customer service because he started doing money transfers too. Those started becoming real suspicious too, and he could tell I was on to him. They were always even amounts, always under the amount that we had to report, and he always made it out to people and the names were never the same. I tried to play dumb once since he had sent well over 10 grand within a week, and I acted concerned for him, saying, "Do you know the people you're sending money to?" and mentioned how there have been a lot of scammers. He smirked and said, "Yeah, they're my employees. This is the fastest way I can pay them." I thought, not really, but hey, it was none of my business, so I dropped it for now. However, he continued coming in and continued to be a creep, and I was getting fed up with it. I mentioned it to someone else that worked there about how the money transfers were really sus, but she just shrugged it off. The problem with at least the store I worked at was that nobody seemed to care. If it didn't directly affect them, they didn't bother with anything. So I figured out how to file a report myself on the money transfers, and I did. In the meantime, he continued to show up there. However, things got worse. We all wore name tags, so he could see our first name, but not our last. Yet, one time he came in to do another money transfer, he started handing the paper to me, and he took his sunglasses off and said, "Let's do this without the small talk today, Miss Anderson." How the hell did he know my last name? I just stared at him for a second before continuing. It was obvious at this point to him that he was correct. I completed it without another word to him and continued on with my day. I again told my coworker when they came in and said he probably just saw it somewhere or overheard someone else say it. I didn't believe this because I had no reason to use my last name, but could do nothing about it. From then on, he would come in and make more gross comments to me, call me babe, and make kissing faces even at me. At one point, I was already having a bad day when I saw him in line, so I called up my manager and told them that they need to ring him up because I was no longer comfortable doing it. Their idea of doing that was to look over the form, check his ID, and then hand it to me saying, "Do it." Furiously, I did so as he leaned against the counter and chuckled. He then said that I was too smart and pretty to be working here, and that he could get me a good paying job with my looks. I looked him straight in the eyes and said no thanks and didn't say another word to him. That night, as I was walking to my car to leave, I noticed an envelope on my windshield. As stupid as it was, I looked around, got in my car, and opened it. It was a card saying happy birthday with a hotel card in it with a room number written on it. The card said something like, "In case you change your mind." The part that freaked me out the most was that my birthday was the next day. Granted, I had no proof, but I knew it had to be this guy. Not only did he know my full name, but he also knew what I drove and my birthday. I started crying in my car. I lived alone, so I had no one to turn to or talk to about this other than my mom. She suggested I call the police, but I had no evidence it was even this guy, and besides, he hasn't done anything specifically to me, so I know they won't do much. I did start having this guy that did carts walk me to my car just in case. He was one of the few people there that I liked and believed me. I quit shortly after and started working with my mom because I didn't want to see this guy anymore. I hope he got caught because I never want to see him again, and I hope he didn't put anyone else through this. So that, my friends, was another scary story collection. Stories that go anywhere, do anything, because they don't care how creepy they're being, but yet we still love them, or tolerate them, like that one family member. Anyways, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below, and if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment on your thoughts, or let me know, how you doing? Anything new going on for you? Anything exciting you want to talk about? Or anything you want to vent about? And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic week, and until next time, take care.